Hey everyone, welcome to the channel and I hope you're doing well. If you're new here, we talk about crime, mystery and other similar topics, so if you are interested, be sure to stick around and subscribe. Today, we will be looking into the unsolved murder of two 15-year-old girls, Christine Sharrock and Marianne Schmidt, known as the Wanda Beach murders. Despite an exhaustive investigation, decades on, the mystery remains. On January 11th, 1965, 15-year-old Christine Sharrock and Marianne Schmidt spent the day at Wanda Beach in Cronulla with Marianne's four younger siblings. After lunch, the two teenagers told the children they would fetch their bags from the southern end of the beach, but never returned. The following day, the brutally murdered bodies of Christine and Marianne were found hidden in the sand dunes near the Wanda Surf Club. Thus, the case became known as the Wanda Beach murders, and one mention of the word is enough to send chills down the spine of anyone who remembers a case that dominated television news reports and all forms of media that day. The killing sparked one of the biggest manhunts in Australian history, with the police file on the case being over 10,000 pages long and over 14,000 people having been interviewed. It was one of the most horrific crimes Australia had ever seen, but police were unable to identify the killer, despite an exhaustive investigation. Decades on, the mystery remains, and the Wanda case still contains many more questions than answers. So what drew Marianne and Christine to the Wanda Sandhills that day? Had they prearranged to meet someone, or were they just in the wrong place at the wrong time? Many different theories have surrounded the case since day one. But one thing is clear, a ruthless killer has never been brought to justice. The Schmidt family migrated from Germany to Australia in 1958. Marianne's parents were Elizabeth and Helmut Schmidt, and she had an older brother called Helmut Jr. and various younger siblings, Hans, Peter, Wolfgang, Trixie and Norbert, who was born upon arrival to Australia. They stayed in various migrant camps upon their arrival before finally settling into their family home in Brush Road, West Ryde, northwest of Sydney. The Schmidt family lived next door to Christine Sharrock, who lived on Bush Road with her grandparents, Jim and Janet. Her father had recently passed away and her mother remarried, so she lived with her grandparents by choice. Christine and Marianne formed an instant bond and were always in each other's company. Both girls were described as quiet and well behaved, and both did well in school and attended church regularly. Given their personalities, the girls weren't likely to hang around any unsavory characters. Then in 1964, Marianne's father passed away. One can only imagine how much tighter this would have made the bond between Marianne and Christine. Well, both had lost fathers that they were close to at such a young age. The girls also shared a love for the beach. However, the only beach the girls had visited was Cronulla, because it was the only beach accessible by train at the time. The girls attended the beach on New Year's Day in 1965, only days before their murder. While at the beach, the girls walked to the Wanda sand dunes. The next day, Marianne returned to the beach with her brothers, but Christine didn't make this trip. Marianne left her family for a little while, and when she returned, she mentioned she went for a walk to Wanda, but she didn't say why. In early January 1965, Marianne's mother was admitted to the hospital to undergo an operation. She left her eldest son in charge of the household while she was in the hospital recovering. On January 9th, Marianne visited her mother in hospital and asked if Christine and herself could take her younger siblings to the beach. Marianne's mother permitted them to do so. However, the weather on the 10th of January turned out terrible, so they postponed the beach trip to the next day. When getting ready for the beach on the morning on the 11th of January, Christine mentioned to her grandma that it would be fun to walk along the Wanda sand dunes again. Christine's grandmother was aware of how far these sand dunes are from the central part of the beach, around 2 kilometers, and replied, "Don't go today, love. You have the little ones. It is too far." Christine argued back, but was again told by her grandmother not to go to the sand dunes. So what are the Wanda sand dunes, and why were the girls so fascinated by them? The Wanda sand dunes, otherwise known as the Green Hills, run behind Wanda Beach. Wanda is a native Australian word meaning sand hills by the beach. The distance from the main beach to the sand dunes is about 2 kilometers, and then the dunes themselves run out even longer than that. The main beach area was clean and prestigious. However, the sand dunes were isolated and a completely different story. In 1965, the sand dunes were described as Sydney's filthiest and loneliest stretch of beach, littered with any amount of junk and rubbish that you can think of, including cans, bottles, and of course broken glass. This isolation made the dunes a perfect spot for people who didn't want to be seen, making them a location for illegal activities at the time. It doesn't sound like the type of place that 2 well-behaved young girls go. However, the girls were not from the local area. Their homes were a 2-hour train ride away. Furthermore, there is no evidence to suggest that the girls were aware of what was going on in the sand dunes at the time. So, on January 11th, the girls packed for their day at the beach. Christine packed a flask of cordial, but no food. She took a £1 note and said she would buy lunch. Meanwhile, Marianne packed sandwiches and fruit. At 8:30 a.m, the girls and Marianne's younger siblings made their way to the train station. They arrived at Cronulla Beach at 11 a.m, but when they arrived, they were met by news that the beach was closed due to dangerous sea and strong winds. If only they had turned around and gone home, but they didn't. So instead, they headed to the southern end of the beach and hung out around the rocks. Marianne's younger brother Wolfgang kept pestering her that he wanted to go for a swim. Finally, she gave in and took him to a shallower, more secluded spot for a quick dip. They then rejoined the others at the rocks for lunch. Once there, Wolfgang saw the girls talking to a boy he described as being around 16 years old, hunting for crabs around the rocks with a homemade spear. Shortly after lunch, Marianne suggested going for a stroll to the sand dunes. They all agreed and started their walk, but left their belongings on the rocks. However, during their walk it became too much for the younger kids. The wind was whipping up sand and stinging their legs, so the younger children found a spot, sheltered from the wind, where Marianne and Christine told them to stay put while they headed back to the rocks to grab their belongings, ready to head home. They mentioned there would be about 20 minutes. However, the girls clearly had no intention of going home just yet, so instead of walking south to the rocks towards their belongings, Marianne and Christine continued walking north towards the Wanda sand dunes. It was the last time the younger children ever saw the girls alive. An eyewitness, Dennis, was the last known person to see the girls alive. He described seeing the girls hurrying through the sand dunes. They were about 800 meters away from where the bodies were later found. He said that one of the girls kept looking over their shoulder, as if they were being followed, but after having a bit of a look, he couldn't see anyone and didn't think much more of it. In the meantime, the children continued to wait for the girls. They looked at one stage, but couldn't find them. They waited for a few more hours, but were aware that time was slipping away from them, and that they had to make it back to the train station for the last train home at 6 p.m. So they made their way south along the beach, back to their belongings on the rocks. Finally, they reached their things, noticed they were untouched, and headed home. They arrived home at 8 p.m. Marianne's older sibling and Christine's grandparents were made aware of the girl's disappearance, and the police were called. The police arrived just before midnight to file the missing person report, and it was broadcasted to every police station in the area. It would have been so different back in 1965, with no mobile phones to track, no social media accounts to check, no instant media releases that could go viral and keep the public on the lookout. However, even if this modern technology existed, it would have already been too late. Christine and Marianne were already dead. At 2 p.m. on January 12, 1965, Peter Smith, aged 17, was walking through the sand dunes with his two younger nephews when he saw what he initially thought was a store mannequin lying in the sand, so he went for a closer look. Filled with shock and horror after discovering what he really found, Peter ran to the Wanda Surf Club about 1,500 meters to the south of where he found the body. He informed the caretaker that he had found the body of a young girl and asked to use the phone to contact the police. Police arrived and Peter led them to the body. Upon closer inspection, the police noticed 3 feet were sticking up from the sand, not 2. The already horrific discovery became even more so. Well, there were 2 bodies, not 1, and they weren't buried, just covered with sand, which the wind had blown from the previous night. It didn't take long for the police to link the missing person report to the horrific murders, and not long after this, a positive identification was made. The place the girls were murdered was very isolated, even though it was only 2 dunes back from the beach. You can't even hear waves crashing from this location. You could scream your head off, and no one would hear a thing. There was blood and apparent signs of struggle within the area, including a drag mark back to where the bodies were found. It is believed that Marianne was knocked down and stabbed, and Christine was killed 32 meters away, her body dragged back. It is believed that Christine witnessed Marianne being attacked, and then ran off, trying to escape, only to be caught a few meters away. Car tracks were also located, although it's unsure if these were related to what occurred. It is possible, though, that the killer left in a vehicle. Both Christine and Marianne were savagely attacked. The attack was so savage that full details were never released. However, Christine's cause of death was a hemorrhage because of penetrating wounds to the chest, associated with a fracture to the skull and injury to the brain. And Marianne's cause of death was a hemorrhage because of cutthroat and penetrating wounds to the chest. There were also clear signs that the girls had been sexually assaulted. Christine's pants had been removed, and Marianne's swimming costume had been cut and rolled up, exposing her lower half. A semen sample was also found. The time of death was estimated to be between 2 p.m. and midnight on Monday the 11th of January. It was discovered that Christine had undigested celery and cabbage in her stomach, meaning it had to be eaten within an hour of her death, which is interesting as neither of the girls brought these to the beach. Christine also had a blood alcohol reading of 0.015. Christine was not known to ever drink, and her mother said she couldn't even stand the smell of alcohol. Within a year and a half of the investigation, Sydney police interviewed a total of 7,000 individuals and followed countless suspects. Yet, regardless of the efforts of investigators and the public, to this day, no one has been charged with the murders of Marianne Schmidt and Christine Sharrock, making it one of the longest unsolved murders in the history of New South Wales. Despite the case being nearly 6 decades old, new information about a possible suspect has surfaced within recent years. Christopher Bernard Wilder, who moved to the United States in 1969, was linked to the case in 2018. While in the United States, Christopher Bernard Wilder, dubbed the Beauty Queen Killer, abducted and violated at least 12 women, killing 9 of them during a 6-week cross-country crime spree in the US in early 1984. Wilder lived in Australia from birth until 1969 and was residing on Sydney's northern beaches during the Wanda murders. Police files obtained from the 1960s revealed that Wilder was named as an official police suspect. While living in the United States, Wilder became a serial killer, starting in the early 80s. Wilder was charged with more sex crimes in Australia on a family visit in 1982, yet he quickly returned to the United States, where he continued his killing spree. Although Wilder seems to be a prime suspect for the Wanda Beach murders, it would now be impossible to charge him. Well, he died from an accidental suicide after shooting himself during a fight against 2 New Hampshire state troopers in 1984. Being one of the oldest and most well-known unsolved murders in Australian history, the homicides at Wanda Beach still puzzle authorities and online sleuths alike. However, the wealth of knowledge and evidence found on the internet by researchers may eventually lead to an answer. Forensic science technology is only getting better and has helped resolve decades-old cases and provide closure for grieving families. Yet time is running out, as many of the suspects have died in recent years, and this cold case, which occurred 57 years ago, only seems to be getting colder. Hey everyone, thanks for watching this video on the Wanda Beach murders. It's a very tragic case, and let me know what you thought down below in the comments. If you like the channel and the content I put on, be sure to subscribe and make sure to have notifications turned on so you get all my videos as soon as I upload them. If you have any suggestions, be sure to leave them in the comments, and I'll see all of you in the next video. Thanks.